Okay, hello, everybody. I'm sorry I don't speak Spanish, and I'm aware that it's a great honor for me to be included in this series because I don't speak Spanish, but you still wanted me to present. And I hope that I can speak at a good pace so that the interpreters don't have problems, because I get very excited and sometimes I talk faster and faster. I will try and stay calm. I know that this is the last in a series of presentations, which I'm sure you found very helpful. My session is one that I've given quite a lot in the last 2 years. I did this presentation at the Charge Foundation conference in Orlando 2 years ago. I also did it in Germany. I did it for the New York Deafblind Collective Charge Conference in the fall. I did it for the French Charge Conference also in the fall. And I've done it somewhere else, and I can't remember where. So it's been very popular. And what I wanted to do in this session is remind you about things. Some things might be new information, but if it's not new information, I hope at least I will help you to remember things that you might have forgotten or that you might not really be thinking about, because charge is so complicated. And if I go to my first slide, I'll let you read this. I'm sorry it's so much text. And what I'm saying here is, first of all, this is very complicated. Secondly, most professionals that you meet to help with your child will not understand how complicated charge is. And they may look at you as if you're a crazy mother or a crazy father. They may think it's impossible for one child to have so many complicated issues and still be functioning, still be growing, still be alive even. And because of that, because of the number of problems in charge, for you as parents, you always have to decide your priorities. What should you be working on today? What should you be thinking about at the moment with your child? Should you be dealing with a dentist for their teeth? Or should you be dealing with the physical therapist for their body control and maybe standing and walking? Should you be working with the behavior specialist because there are problems with behavior? Should you be dealing with sleep problems because they can be severe? Should you be working on feeding and swallowing? All those issues will be there, but you can't work on them all at the same time. So you are always having to decide what are the most important things at the moment. And when you do that, it's very easy to forget the other things which don't seem so important. And I'm here just to remind you of those other things, because they can become very important if they're not dealt with fairly early in the child's development. Having said that, I always like to show this slide. This is a quote, something I wrote almost 30 years ago when I was still living in England. Just to make the point that people with charge have remarkable abilities, they have remarkable skills, And they have ways of doing things which are unique to them. Their disabilities, especially their multiple sensory problems, present huge obstacles to looking, listening, swallowing, drinking, moving, resisting gravity and sitting up, lifting your head and sitting up, and then, of course, standing and walking, acquiring language and communicating. All those things will be much more difficult, but the people themselves find ways to get round many of these problems. And it's very, very interesting to look at them and think, how is he doing that? How did he manage to do that? What did he use to help him do that? Because he must be thinking of ways he can function. And I think this is the key to working with a child with charge. You have to recognize the abilities they already have. You have to recognize the interests that they already have. And you have to honor those things. And if you're a teacher like me, you have to use those things in your teaching to make your teaching more successful. And at the end of this quote, I talk about 3 characteristics I see in children with charge. The very strong willpower. They are very determined and can be very stubborn. The great spirit, they're hard children to control. They're hard children to shut away because they resist and their personalities grow and explode and they want to be part of the world. They want to be noticed. They want to be to have your attention. And lastly, a very strong sense of humor. And this is, you come to a charge conference, you will see these 3 things all day long, again and again, whether the child is 1 year old or 21 years old. These characteristics come out. And for me, working so long in this field, one of the most exciting things now is seeing so many adults with charge. You know, when I started, it was all babies and toddlers. And now we go to the charge conference and there are people on listening to me this evening who are adults with charge and who can actually sit down with you and tell you how they do things, how they learned things, what the main problems were, what they did about the problems. And that gives us so much to learn about. And for me, the best thing about the Foundation Conference now is all those adults who I knew when they were little children, and now they're in their 20s. Some of them are in their 30s already. And to see that whole development from being a baby to being an adult is really fascinating. So I've picked 6 things. I hope it's not too much for you. In the beginning, I picked 10 things. And very quickly, my slides got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I realized 10 was too many things. I went down to 8. And in the end, I went to 6. So we'll see. We'll see if we can cover all of these things. So the first issue is deaf blindness. And this often comes as a surprise to many parents. If your child can hear something, if your child can see something, if your child maybe has a cochlear implant or a hearing aid, if your child has glasses or contact lenses, people often don't think of them as being deaf-blind. There's an assumption that because they can see something and hear something, they're okay. They're doing okay, just like we are doing okay. And in fact, I would guess practically every young child with charge is deafblind in our terms, the way that we use that phrase. And it's good to remember that deafblindness is a functional diagnosis. What we're talking about is not just eyes and ears, but the way that they work for the child. What kind of practical vision does the child have that they can use for themselves? What kind of practical hearing skills does the child have? The doctors might say the eyes look normal or the ears look okay. The testing might show that things are really pretty good. But when you look at the child, how they function, you can see that really their hearing and their vision is not so good as the doctors suggest. And it can also work the other way. Many of you will have been told your child can't hear, will never hear, will never speak. Your child can see almost nothing. They'll never be able to see and reach for something. They'll never be able to walk on their own without somebody to help them. And you see the child beginning to do those things, even though the medical professionals have said it won't happen. And the message always is, trust the child, because they know better than me, they know better than you, they know better than the doctor what they've got and what they haven't got, what works and what doesn't work, what they're interested in and what they're not interested in. So deafblindness really needs to be on your mind as a parent. And of course, here in the United States, still at the moment, we have state deafblind projects, and Myrna and Julie are my colleagues who I worked with here in California at the State Deafblind Project. And the deafblind projects can be very helpful to you, sometimes with practical help, but sometimes just with giving you information or giving you access to the right people or the right services. So if you haven't yet investigated your state deafblind project, I would suggest it would be a good idea to do that, because it will probably be very, very helpful for you. Most people with charge I've met are deafblind in the way they function, even though they can be very able and very smart. I still think of them as having deafblindness. We talk a lot about eyes and ears, and in the deafblind world, because we call it deaf-blind, we think about ears and eyes. But if you have charge syndrome, probably there are a lot more difficulties than just with using your eyes and using your ears. I list here some of the other difficulties, things like balance, touch, temperature, pain, and smell, as well as a whole range of things like controlling your body temperature or drinking and swallowing and eating food effectively. This is my list of the senses. I will talk about it in a little bit of detail. Some of these senses you know about. We all learn about the 5 senses, and we all know about vision, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. But they are only 5 senses, and there are other senses as well. And today I will be talking about proprioception and the vestibular sense. I won't be saying much about interoception, but that is the sense that gives us a feeling of things like food moving through our stomach, of our breathing, of our body temperature, whether we're getting too cold or too hot, those kinds of issues, which can also be affected in charge. But really, it's proprioception and the vestibular sense that I want to focus on in this session today. Proprioception is the sense that helps us to feel where our body parts are, especially our neck and head, our arms and our hands, and our legs and our feet. It also helps us feel our back and our shoulders. And the receptors to that sense are inside the muscles and the joints, all through the body. And they are stimulated when any part of the body moves. And what stimulates them is muscles compressing and getting tight, or muscles stretching and getting loose, or muscles twisting. So if at the moment I mention your left heel, you can all feel your left heel, I would guess. I can certainly feel mine. I'm not touching it, but I can feel it. And to feel it more, I just moved my foot. And if I move my foot, if I bounce my foot up and down, my brain gets a better idea where my foot is. This sense operates unconsciously all the time for us. But for people with charge, often this sense is not working very well. They have very loose muscles, what we call low muscle tone. And if the muscle tone is very low, the proprioceptive sense doesn't send very clear messages to the brain. And the children do a lot of things to increase the proprioceptive information coming to their brain. And I'll come to that in a moment. The other sense I want to talk about, the vestibular sense, is located in the ears on both sides of the head. And this is the sense that tells us about where our head is and whether or not our head is moving and what direction it's moving. And I will say a lot more about that in a while. So all the senses on this slide might not be working properly for somebody with charge. And we think about that. It's hard for us to imagine all these senses not working properly. Some of them may be missing completely. Some children may be completely blind or profoundly deaf. We know that many children with charge don't have any sense of smell. And because of that, they don't have any sense of taste. Or they can only smell very strong smells. They can only taste very strong tastes. And it's not unusual to meet a child who likes lots of barbecue sauce on their food, or lots of tomato ketchup, or lots and lots of sugar in their drinks. Because if the taste input is not very, very powerful, they just don't get it. They don't receive the message at all. And because all these senses may be not working, I think that most children with charge are not in touch with their bodies very effectively. They're not feeling their bodies very effectively. We can feel our bodies most of the time because our senses are working. It's our senses that connect the brain to the body. That's the crucial connection. Your brain just sits in your head and it doesn't know anything unless There are senses sending information. Unless there are eyes saying, this is where I am, this is the room, there's the window, there's the light. And unless our ears are saying, I can hear voices outside, and outside the window I can hear cars going by. And then my proprioceptive sense is telling me that I'm sitting on a chair and I'm quite comfortable at the moment. I don't have shoes on and my feet are on a carpet, which is nice and warm because the heating is on. All that kind of information is coming into my brain through my senses. If you take those senses away, or if you stop them working, my brain is left without any idea where it is. And what the children do is sometimes exaggerate that sensory information. They do a whole range of behaviors to improve the way their brain is feeling their body. And I will show you some pictures now. But do think in terms of the children's brains not being connected to their bodies very well. So they do things to get the connection working better. Here's an adult doing something fairly common in charge. You see those fingers? Can you do this? I can't do this. I can't possibly do this. But then I don't need to do this because I can feel my hands because my proprioceptive senses is working. This person has developed a way of crossing those fingers, which gives her brain a much better idea where her hand is and what her hand is doing. This is a much younger child. This child, I think, is about 6, 7 months old. And doing something very remarkable, crossing his fingers. It's completely voluntary. He has decided to do this because he wants to know where that part of his body is, because it gives him a much better idea where he is and what he's doing, which gives him more confidence and which helps him to relax more and not become too stressed or too anxious. And when you see children doing this, it tells you straight away they're not feeling their body very effectively, but also they are smart and they've discovered a way of helping to improve the situation. Here's somebody waiting to see the doctor. This could have been me today if I went to see my doctor instead of giving the webinar. Good job I was reminded. Needing to be barefoot. Many children with charge like bare feet because they want as much contact with the floor as possible because of this problem. I need to feel my feet and feel where they are. Once you put socks and shoes on, I don't feel, my sense of touch isn't good enough. But with bare feet, I get more information. And again, can you do this? I've tried, I can't do this. My toes don't move like that. Here's another doctor's waiting room. A boy who may well be a bit stressed by going to see the doctor. It's a familiar situation. And where we would sit on the chair, this boy has a characteristic behavior. We call it planking. It's something they use in yoga. And many of the children's postures are a little bit like yoga postures. It's very interesting. They don't know yoga. They've never seen yoga, but they've experimented to find what helps them. And I think the pressure this boy is feeling on his elbows and his chest and the fronts of his legs and on his ankles are probably calming him down. Deep pressure calms you down. Light pressure arouses you, it tickles you, it makes you want to move away or laugh. Deep pressure gets you calmed down. And that's why if a child is upset, we hug them. And the more they cry, the harder we hug them to try and bring their arousal level down. So these strategies are indicators of intelligence. You know, it's too easy to look at this photo and say, this boy is not very smart because he should be sitting in the chair. It's not for laying across. And that people do that. They say, oh, he's crazy. Actually, he's smart. And there's a function to what he's doing. He's doing it for a specific purpose because it helps him. And I think in this situation, it helps him cope with the anxiety of seeing the doctor. And then here's a classic charge posture, bringing one knee up and then bringing the other ankle on the knee. It creates massive proprioceptive information through the legs and the hips. And not only is it calming, but for many children, it's the only way they can go to sleep. It's the only way they can feel that their body is completely safe and they don't need to worry about falling over or falling off the bed. And this boy has done it himself. He's discovered this all by himself. He also knows to cover his head, to shut out presumably light, maybe sound. Maybe he doesn't want any air movement on his face, so he covers his face, and then he opens his hands and he puts them under his butt. So again, proprioception. His butt is pushing his hands into the floor, and he's getting lots and lots of deep pressure to help him sleep. So all these photographs give you an idea of children helping their brain feel their body a bit more effectively than it normally does. Very typical in deafblindness, but even more typical in charge syndrome, I think, because of the complexity. And then this is taken from the National Deafblind Child Count in the United States. And it's a big document, but I've just taken out this one page. It looks at the etiology or the cause of the deafblindness. And this section is about hereditary syndromes. And if you look, the biggest syndrome is charge syndrome. There were over 1,000 children with charge. The next biggest was Usher syndrome, with not even half as many. And then you see Down syndrome with 367 and so on. Charge is far and away the biggest, numerically biggest cause of congenital deafblindness now. It's grown remarkably over the 40 years I've been working in the field. When I came into the deafblind field 42 years ago, nobody had heard of charge. It was very new. I was lucky because the first child I worked with had the diagnosis of charge. And we were all saying, what's charge? And his mother didn't know, and his father didn't know, and I didn't know. And it took a long time to start learning what this syndrome is about. So think about deafblindness. Now I'll go on to the second of my 6 things, vestibular dysfunction. I've mentioned the vestibular sense, and I think this is very, very important. I've written about it in the charge book, the first charge book, I think, that came out a long time ago now, 14 years ago. And I say that I think that we need to investigate this more. I think the vestibular sense problems are the most important overall of all the sensory issues. Yes, being blind is important, being deaf is important, but we kind of understand what it means to be blind or to be deaf. People don't understand what it means to have significant vestibular problems. And that's become my campaign over the decades, to try and help people to understand this and think about it. And you will find you don't meet many professionals who have that knowledge. You will need to acquire that knowledge and share it with them. And there is information about it now. I've provided some, and other people are more interested now. And I then say that in the future, if we learn more about vestibular problems, it will help us learn more about all sorts of other things in charge that don't look like vestibular issues, because the vestibular sense covers a lot of developmental areas. I hope I'm making sense with this. Now I have a very technical slide. This shows what you should find in the inner ear on each side of the head. So you have exactly this structure on both sides of the head. The yellow thing at the bottom is the cochlea, which is the organ of hearing. And you're probably familiar with that because your child may well have hearing problems. And of course, if your child has a cochlear implant, the implant actually is inserted into the cochlea. That's the yellow thing. Above the yellow thing and over to the right, you can see a grey area and a blue area called the saccule and the utricle, which are part of the vestibular system. And then in brown colour, you have those three semicircular canals. And they're in particular configuration, and they each have a special function. All that you see, the saccule, the utricle, and the canals are all hollow and filled with fluid. And inside they're lined with nerve hairs. And as your head moves, that fluid moves around and it moves the nerve hairs, which send messages to your brain what your head is doing. There are three canals. One of them is stimulated by this movement, like when you say yes. Another one is stimulated when you say no, side to side. And the third one is stimulated when your head moves in a diagonal, or the other way. And because you have all three of them working, anywhere you move your head, that fluid will move in a particular way to send a message to your brain, telling you where your head is and what it's doing. We can't imagine not knowing where our head is. So you just have to believe me, this is a very serious problem. And if you look at the children, you see it all the time. So I'm going to talk a lot about this system. One thing I would say, many of the children like to be upside down. They like to hang upside down. I have many, many pictures of children. You will see some this afternoon, hanging upside down. And I have a theory that if they hang upside down, there might be some vestibular stimulation coming through to their brain because they like it very much. I talked to Daniel Chu at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and he said it's quite possible that one of those canals, the one that's triggered by this motion, If the head goes completely upside down, there may be some vestibular function coming to the brain. So he did a research study. He looked at many, many scans. And what they discovered last year is that for many people with charge, if the semicircular canals are missing, they may have the anterior canal, the one that's triggered by this. Many of those children had that semicircular canal, but not the other two. Sometimes they only had part of it, but it does look as if that is the one semicircular canal that might grow in the fetus and give the child some kind of sensory input. So if the vestibular sense is seriously impaired and not working, there are many, many things that you could see that could go wrong. And I'll just let you read this, but I will point out a couple of points. The very first point, disorganization of all sensory information. If you have major vestibular problems, even with normal eyes and normal hearing, you probably won't have normal functional vision and hearing. The vestibular problems will create an obstacle to you developing good vision and hearing. You can see that I mention difficulties with developing good speech and language. People think that's all because of hearing problems, but actually it's more complicated. And vestibular dysfunction will slow down language development. There's no doubt about it. Problems with behavior, and I'll draw your attention to the very last one, autoregulation. The self-regulation, the ability to control yourself, not to get too excited or too angry, not to get too upset, not to get too frightened. All those abilities depend on you having a good vestibular sense. And we know children with charge do not self-regulate very well in most cases. And again, if you come to the Charge Foundation conference, you will see a lot of evidence of children not being able to self-regulate very effectively, and families having to intervene in order to bring the child's arousal up, or more often, bring their arousal level down and back to a more functional level. I was at a conference once with a boy I've known. He has a degree from university, but I've known him since he was 5 years old. He was now about 16 or 17. And I'm with him and his mother, and we're in the line for lunch at the buffet. And we're talking, and the boy suddenly went wild, started to grab people and push them around, throw them around. He seemed to be very upset and very angry. And his mother and I almost had a fight with him. And we got him, and we apologized to people, and we took him out of the hall. And when he calmed down, he said, this is a very intelligent boy. He said, the people in the line were not in the order of their height. He wanted the smallest people at the front and the biggest people at the back. And it seems crazy, but he got this idea and it sent him way, way out of control. And he couldn't stop himself. And those problems have continued. He's got better and better at controlling them, but he has to work at it because it doesn't happen normally. And you probably know people. I have a brother who doesn't self-regulate well. He doesn't have charge. He doesn't have anything, but he's not very good at it. But in charge, it can be clinical. It can be really, really chronic. And then by association, things like breathing and eating and digesting can all be affected because you've got low muscle tone. You like to be horizontal because gravity is a challenge, and that doesn't help your digestive system work. And fatigue. Living with poor vestibular function is exhausting, and we need to acknowledge that. I'm just trying to turn my slides on. Okay. So I will come back to the vestibular sense when I talk about walking, but I'm going to move on to number 3, which is vision problems. And I'm going to talk about 2 problems in particular. First, visual field loss, and secondly, visual fixation. So what does visual field mean? Visual field is the whole area that you can see with your eyes. And you have 2 eyes, and the fields overlap in the middle, and your left eye sees way round to the left, and your right eye sees way round to the right. I don't see in my left eye at all. So my visual field is only from this eye. And if I think about what can my right eye see on my left side, I can move my finger only to here. On the right side, I can move my finger to here, and I can still see it. But if I move this back anymore, it disappears. So the visual field relies on 2 eyes working together to give you that whole field. Now, in charge, one particular eye problem is coloboma. It's extremely common, like vestibular dysfunction. We think maybe as many as 90% of people with charge have at least one coloboma. A coloboma is where the retina, which is inside the eyeball, and the lining of the eyeball hasn't developed fully. And the area where the retina didn't develop is called a coloboma. And the eye might have one coloboma. It might be very small. It might be large. It might have 2 or 3 colobomas. A child can have a coloboma in one eye, but not in the other. Or they may have colobomas in both eyes. And they're always different in the 2 eyes. They're a different place, a different size, and a different shape. And they cause a blind spot, an area of the retina that can't see. So there's part of the visual field missing. And I'm going to try and explain with these diagrams. So first, look at the eye on the left. You can see the eye is cut away, and that red area is the retina. It's attached all around the back of the eyeball, and it's very light sensitive. And when light comes through the front of the eye, through the lens, it goes back onto the retina, and the retina turns the light into electrical energy and then sends messages through the optic nerve to the brain, where the visual cortex interprets the electrical messages, and we call that seeing. What am I seeing? Do I recognize it? Do I need more information? Do I need to go closer? Do I need to run away because it looks like the doctor? All that kind of information is conveyed through the retina. Now, if you look at this eye, you will see at the bottom of the red area, there's a patch of white. That's an area that should have retina, but in this eye, there's a coloboma, and that is the coloboma at the bottom of the eye. The colobomas tend to be lower down in the eye. In the fetus, the eye starts to form, the eyeball forms from the top, and then in normal development, it develops down, and then it meets at the bottom and joins together, and you have an eyeball. In charge, it's possible for the eyeball to form, but the retina inside the eyeball stops developing at some point, and that's the coloboma. So this eye will have a blind spot down there at the bottom. But you see a small yellow area called the macula. The macula is the area of very fine vision. It's the part of the retina you use when you are reading, writing, or text. It's the part of the eye you use if you're trying to do something like thread a needle. I don't know if anyone threads needles anymore, but if you want to get a piece of cotton through a needle, you need a good macula. Otherwise, you'll be there all day and it won't work. So this eye will have probably good visual acuity for things like reading, but it's going to have some visual field loss. Now look at the other eye on the right. This eye has a much bigger coloboma. You can see the retina is smaller and the coloboma, the white area, is much, much bigger and much higher in the eye. And the macula is missing. It didn't develop. So this eye will be much more significantly affected and central vision is missing. Now, one of the interesting things about people with charge, if your macula is missing, imagine not looking at the needle and the cotton, trying to thread it using your side vision. It's impossible. You need that very fine vision to do it. But I know adults with charge whose colobomas cover the macula, but they can read. They've trained their brains to read using side vision or peripheral vision. So it's good to remember that people with charge can find ways which we can't find, which we can't help them with, though we can help them in many, many ways, of course. And again, we need to respect them. I didn't put this photo in, but I have a photo of an adult with charge who lives in Canada. She took a selfie looking at her phone, but she's not looking. She seems to be looking in, the phone is over here and she's looking over here. She's actually using her side vision to look at the phone. And she's given me permission to use the photo. And I will probably use it in Arizona this summer because it makes the point very clearly. So back to the coloboma. I really hope this is making sense because it's a very complicated topic and you're listening to my English translated into Spanish. So I'm just hoping it's working. If you look at these eyes, it's easy to think that the visual field missing will be in the bottom of the visual field. So if the bottom of your retina is missing, you don't see down below. So it's like having something here stopping you seeing like your knees when you're sitting down. And you might think, for these kids to look down at their knees, they have to lean forward a long, long way to do that. But actually, that's completely wrong because of physics. And this diagram shows you an eye looking at a little man. And you see, there's the man. You see the rays of light coming through the front of the eye and sending the image of the man onto the retina. But you notice as the light comes in through the eye and through the lens, it gets inverted. So it comes onto the retina upside down. And that information goes to our brains upside down. And our brains then turn it the right way up. This is This is something I will never understand, but I do know it's true. What that means is, you see the little man, look at the image coming onto the retina. Now imagine the bottom of the retina is missing. It's the man's head you won't see. You'll see his feet, you'll see his legs, you might see most of his body, but the very top of the man will be missing because of the way the image is conveyed to the brain. So although the colobomas are on the bottom of the retina, the visual field that's missing is the upper visual field. So it's like wearing a hat pulled too low, and you constantly have to do this. You have to extend your head back, lift your face so that that lower visual field can come up. And this is very typical charge posture, with the head from the side, with the head lifted slightly. And the children have to do this all the time if they're moving around. And it's not a very good posture to be in all the time. I've been in classrooms of young children where the children say, it's story time. The teacher might be signing and speaking. The children all sit cross-legged on the floor. This happened to me. And the girl with charge kept getting up and sitting on a chair. And the teacher made her get on the floor and cross her legs. And as soon as he went back to the story, she got up on the chair. And fortunately, I was there, and I explained, if the teacher's up on a chair and the girl is down on the floor, she can't see him at all because of her upper visual field loss. So she has to do this, and she can't do that for a whole 15-minute story. But she knows if she gets up on a chair, it's much easier and more comfortable for her. It's so easy to misinterpret these children, to even punish them for not being more the way you think they should be. And I know there are behavioral issues. I'm not talking about those. But sometimes children do things to function which are seen as bad behavior. And they might not be bad behavior, even though they may be a nuisance and a pain in the butt. They are attempts to function.
David, this is Myrna. Just a reminder that we only have 25 minutes left.
Okay, and I'm halfway through. Thank you, Myrna. So let me move on. I'm still talking about vision. There is a reflex that we have, which is a vestibular reflex that helps with our vision. This is a definition of it. And if I can describe it very briefly, all it means is if I'm looking at my screen and I move my head, I've moved my head, but I'm still looking at the screen. Now I've put my head the other way, I'm still looking. Now I can lift my head, I'm still looking. My vestibular sense helps me keep my eye on the screen. So I'm okay. If I didn't have a good vestibular sense, when I turn my head, I'm not looking at the screen anymore, and I have to turn and look for the screen. When my head goes up, I'm not looking anymore. My eye's gone up and I'm looking at the wall, and I have to find the screen again. And this is a problem that the children deal with surprisingly effectively. This is taken by a parent at one of the charge conferences, I think in Dallas. During the Saturday night party, she took this photo. There were actually 5 young children. She only got 3, all in exactly the same posture. They all had a phone or an iPad. They all wanted to use their vision. So they all lay on the floor on their side, so their head and their body couldn't move, because if they do move, they're not looking at the phone anymore. They don't want their head or their body to move. So they deal with it by lying down. They learn it themselves. Here's an older child. He's looking at his iPad. He's on the couch. He's kneeling on the couch. He's resting his forehead on the arm of the couch. And he's looking down at the screen and he's watching a video, I think. And in this position, his head is supported, so he's not using a lot of muscle energy. He's perfectly safe and stable. He won't fall. And he can liberate his left hand and operate the screen if he needs to. Here is a girl on her back, one ankle up on the other knee, fixing her body so that she can use her tiny bit of residual vision in just one eye. And here is a girl in one of her favorite positions. Her knees are on the couch, but her head and her hands are on the floor. She's upside down. And I think that activates her vestibular sense as much as it can be activated, which helps to keep her alert and helps her to manage eye movement more effectively. And again, it's easy to think she's crazy and to make her sit up properly, to make her sit on the couch and all that kind of thing. Last picture here. Here is somebody lying very dangerously on the arm of the chair, looking down at the tablet, which is at an angle, and doing very well with it. And I think the children sometimes go into these rather dangerous positions because it helps to keep them alert. They know what is safe and what is unsafe. And they go to the border because that keeps them alert. Again, it's hard for us to understand because we wouldn't do that. And this is what I've been saying in this part of my presentation. You want to fix the body, to fix the head, to fix the eyes, so you can use the vision you've got in the most effective, most efficient, most comfortable way. And we don't want children upside down all day long. We don't want them lying on the arm of the couch all day long. But we have to learn from when they do that what the problem is and what we can do about it. And that's where a good teacher of the blind, a good physical therapist, a good occupational therapist, or a good teacher of the deafblind can be very, very helpful with practical strategies. Okay, speeding up. Balance and walking. Big problem in charge. And as I've already said, for children with charge, gravity is a huge problem. It's dangerous, it's difficult, it takes all your energy, and it can go wrong very easily. And these children have fallen over again and again, and they know the safest place to be is on their back, on the floor probably, or at a desk with their head down on the table to prevent disasters. There are reasons, all sorts of reasons why this is such a big problem. I won't dwell on these. You can have a quick look at them, but you can look at the slideshow later as this is being recorded. And you can see that there are many issues involved in developing walking. So delayed walking is not just because of visual problems. It's not just because of vestibular problems, but the vestibular problems are a big part of the delay and of the problem. And there are other reasons like difficulties with breathing, poor energy, and the bottom one I love. The kids have a better way of moving than walking. Walking's too difficult, too dangerous. If you can scoot on your butt or if you can crawl with your forehead on the floor, you're not going to fall and hurt yourself. And I like that. I see so many children who can't walk, who can move quicker than me. And I can walk, in case you didn't realize. Balance, a good sense of balance comes from three senses: the vision sense, the proprioceptive sense, and the vestibular sense. And all three of those senses work together to help us develop balance. And it's easy to forget that if you see a child with charge walking, they may well be using their vision to help them to stay upright, far more than we use our vision. But we also use vision to help us to stay upright. How often have you been walking somewhere unfamiliar and the lights go out and the first thing you do is stop walking and hold on to the wall? And you realize, boy, I was using my vision a lot to help me balance and avoid falling down. I hope I'm not going too quickly. This is a quote from Jean Ayres, who was a very important occupational therapist. And she said, after air to breathe, postural security is our next most urgent priority. One of the issues, if you don't have a good vestibular system, you don't have protective reflexes. You know, if I fall forwards, my vestibular sense makes me do this. I pull my head back and put my hands out. If I fall backwards, my vestibular sense makes me bring my head forward, ready to hit the floor. If I fall to the left or the right, my hands go that way. Children with charge often don't have those reflexes. So when they fall, they go down like a tree that's been chopped. They go straight down and their head hits the floor with a crack. And I'm sure you're familiar with that. So the knowledge that standing and walking brings that danger can often delay children's walking. And whatever you do with physical therapy and horse riding and massage and yoga, the child will decide when to walk. You can't decide that for them. Maybe they could walk. I've often seen kids, and I agree with the parents. Yes, I think she could walk, but she doesn't think she can walk. And until she thinks she can walk safely, she's not going to do it because she's not stupid, basically. And that's frustrating, but it's good to remember. So the vestibular sense tells you where our head is. What do the kids do to answer that question? I'm not feeling my head properly internally through my vestibular sense. What kinds of things do I need to do in order to feel my head? And you do see head weaving, sometimes in a figure of 8, to activate what's there of the vestibular sense, but also to take in the whole visual field because of visual field loss. Binding the head, pressing the head into things, and oral behaviors, clenching the teeth, grinding the teeth, or chewing on something. Pressure here creates strong proprioceptive information to the brain about where is my mouth and where is my head. So we see those. And here are some children answering that question. Here's a boy, in his break at school. They'd taken a break for 10 minutes. He's removed his shoes and socks straight away, and he's standing on his head. He's getting a lot of deep pressure. He's confirming where his head is, but also where his whole body is, because there's a lot of proprioceptive information coming in. And I think His best vestibular functioning is when he's upside down, because that semicircular canal is probably there and working on some level. Here's a much younger child. This girl can't stand and bear weight on her legs because it's too dangerous. Look what she can do. I can't do this. I don't know if you could. I couldn't do this. It would be a disaster. She wants to feel her body. She wants to feel her head. She wants pressure input because it's important to her, and she's found a way of doing it. Now, again, we don't want this girl doing this all the time. It's putting a lot of pressure on her neck, which is not healthy, but she's sending us a clear message that she needs help with physical therapy to work on developing better muscle tone and going towards sitting and standing. Here's the boy you just saw on his head. He always wears his backpack like this. He loves it on top of his head, so it pushes down and gives pressure. That's where my head is. And he walks much better if he has a backpack. Here's a boy, when he's using fine vision in the classroom, he always goes for his buckets and uses them. I'm going to skip slides. Different styles of moving. You're probably familiar with these. We see kids rolling. We see them sidewinding like a snake, scooting on their backs, a whole range of movement to compensate for their sensory issues. And sometimes you see regular crawling. It is perfectly possible, but it's unusual in children with charge because of their problems. And walking, a whole range of features. And again, I'm sorry, I'm not going through these because there's no time. I have 15 minutes left. But you can see these kinds of things in the children. And the last one is important. Sometimes, because of their terrible vestibular problem, if they're going to cross a room, they look at something like the door handle or the clock on the wall, and they keep looking at it while they walk. And as long as they're looking at it, they're upright. They know that they're in the right position. If you then call them or tap them on the shoulder and they stop looking at the clock, they may well fall over because that was keeping them upright. And you know what walkers are, but I love this picture. Here's somebody with a walker going out into the world. And here's somebody, her mother heard me talk about hiking poles, and she said, did I think she should try it? And it was very successful. This girl had never walked on grass or dirt or sand. She always had to have somebody to hold on to. She got the hiking poles, and on the very first day, she walked everywhere. No problem. And it's good to remember that everything children with Charge syndrome do has meaning for them. Get away from the, oh, it's crazy. It doesn't mean anything. Because that's not helpful. The children give us information even if they're not intending to. And I think the pictures I've shown you really fulfill these kind of functions. It helps them to feel their bodies. It puts the brain in better contact with the body. It confirms their postural security, so they're not going to fall. It may help them use their vision because that reflex is missing. And sometimes those postures help them self-regulate. Most of the postures you've seen calm the children down, and that's important. Number 5, we're almost there. dental problems. These are very common in charge. Facial clefting is pretty common. Facial palsy, where one side of the face may be collapsed with very, very low muscle tone. Teeth that are misaligned. We always say if a child's behavior changes and gets very bad, think about pain. And the amount of pain that comes if you have teeth, and instead of your teeth growing next to each other, they grow into each other, that pain can be unbelievable. So it's important that the children are seen by a dentist. I would say at least once a year, probably with x-rays, just to confirm that there are no problems. We think that the enamel on the teeth may be of poor quality in charge. And we know that if the children have reflux and vomiting, stomach acid in the mouth is very bad for the teeth and the gums. Sometimes the children save food because they don't feel the mouth and the tongue very well. Their sense of touch and proprioception is not good. Or because they have a history of choking and they're very anxious about swallowing, they often save the food like a hamster in the side of the mouth. And if that's done over a long time, it is very bad again for the teeth and the gums. Here is a photograph. This is a child who's had a cleft lip and cleft palate surgically repaired. The operation was successful, but now the teeth need surgery. And you can see just how bad the teeth are. I talked about this to a different group in England. And a mother there had a daughter with charge who's an adult. And she decided to have her daughter x-rayed by a dentist. She hadn't seen a dentist very often because she had heart problems, breathing problems, seizures. There were all kinds of very dangerous problems. So her teeth, she didn't complain. Look at these teeth. Look at the bottom left-hand teeth. Look how jumbled they are. There are too many teeth. They're too close together. This girl does need dental surgery, even though she hadn't been asking for it. And then I have two slides of a boy Julie and I know. This is before the surgery. You see the teeth are not in a good position. And this is after the surgery. This was before, and this was after, to give you an idea of the kinds of issues that need to be dealt with. And lastly, and this, I put this at the end because it's not just about charge, it's about you. Because you've just listened to me for almost 1.5 hours. And I'm sure you're dying to have dinner or go to bed or take a break. I believe that charge causes fatigue. And whoever you are going to have fatigue, which people without charge don't have. And I sat down a few years ago and made a list. What charge issues could cause a person to be tired? And I came up with 21. You might know 22. Any one of these, being visually impaired, causes fatigue because we live in a visual world. Having significant deafness causes fatigue in a hearing world. Each one of these issues is going to demand more time and more energy from you. And children with charge have many of these. I showed this slide once in Germany. And as I was talking, a mom in the audience put her hand up and she said her son had 19 of these. And I knew her son. He was an adult by then. And I was amazed because you wouldn't know because he covers so well. He's had excellent teaching. He's got great parents and a wonderful brother. And they've helped him get to a stage where he manages, but he gets fatigued. And his mother said, people keep saying he's lazy. And it makes me more angry than almost anything else, I think, when people say people with charge are always lazy. In my book, they're the opposite of lazy. I often wish they'd slow down and be a bit more lazy, maybe, than they are. Sorry, I'm just trying to see where I've got to. And I'm going to go to my last slide because time's almost out. How do children with charge fool people? They find all these ways of doing things that they shouldn't be able to do, and it's easy. Like that boy with 19 those features, it's easy to see him and assume all that is okay. And then when he gets upset or has to lie down or falls over something, you think, where did that come from? Well, it came from being completely exhausted and having to do too many things all at the same time. So it's great when your child looks as if their vision is normal, looks as if they can walk without any difficulty, but you know, and you may have to remind people that it's much harder for them than it is for us, just so that they remember, particularly in a school setting. So that's my presentation. I see we have 6 minutes left. I don't know if you have any questions.